Welcome to the first installment of the What Fuels You podcast CTO Limited Series. My name is Albert Squires, and I'm the Managing Director of the Technology Practice. Today's guest is David Glick. David is the CTO of FLEXE, a logistics technology company that brings deep logistics expertise and enterprise-grade technology to deliver innovative e-commerce fulfillment, retail distribution, same-day delivery, and network capacity programs for Fortune 500 companies. As the CTO, David is responsible for the design and development of the FLEXE technology platform. Before FLEXE, he spent nearly 20 years at Amazon, including 5 years as the VP of Fulfillment Technology, where he oversaw the development and functionality of the technology within their fulfillment centers, as well as the technology for Amazon's transportation systems for 2 of those years. So David, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I have to say, obviously knowing the guys at FLEXE from the early days, right when they came up to Seattle, it's extremely exciting to see you leading that organization.
That's great. They did a great job. And one of the fantastic things was they went from 0 to 1, and then they said, we need to bring some new people in to augment what we've done so far, and they were courageous in doing that.
Yeah, totally. Well, like all of our episodes, we start off with some rapid fire. So let's get into it. Morning or night person?
I'm a night person.
Yeah, that seems to be the typical engineer. Not to have any stereotypes, but not surprising there at all. What about masters? This question comes up all the time with me. Masters in computer science versus a BS in computer science and going directly into the workforce?
It's a hard question, but what I've seen is the people who do really well have masters in computer science. That getting that extra depth of knowledge before you start applying it is super helpful. Now, that said, while most SDE1s at Amazon and other places have computer science degrees, it turns out that a third of the principal engineers don't have computer science degrees.
Wow, that is fascinating.
Yeah, and so what we found is that, as you get more senior, writing code becomes less important, and being able to design system, understand requirements, work with people, follow the values or leadership principles that are laid out by the company. Those trump sort of pure technical skills.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And knowing the restrictive amount of small number of principal engineers, I'm going to have to dig into that a little bit later on. What about if you were to build a startup from scratch? What language would you choose and why?
I would choose Java because everybody knows Java. And many of these many startups start with Ruby on Rails because it's the simplest and it's kind of integrated. But that leads you to 5 years down the road. That leads you to a big deconstruct the monolith project. And we have I've worked with people who want to use Go and Python and Scala and all these things. And I talk to my more technical friends because I don't have a CS degree. I have a physics degree. And so I go to my folks who have CS degrees, and the principal engineer always says, I have this conversation with people every week. Like, we want to use Scala, we want to use Go. And it's like all the tools support Java. Everybody knows how to use it. Let's do that.
Yeah, and the if you're building a platform, let's say from Go, I mean the talent pool is just obviously smaller, so that's something to take into consideration. If you were to be mentored by a business leader or a technology leader, past or current, who would it be and why?
I think I've worked with Jeff Bezos before. I've been in meetings with him, and so we'll set that one out. But I think the only person who's nearly as visionary as Jeff is Elon Musk, and so I have a ton of respect for him. The way they're doing things completely different. And, I see Tesla and SpaceX and all these other things, will be the most impactful and most valuable company in the next 100 years.
Yeah, 100%. I'm sure somebody with the physics background can also geek out in that area a little bit as well.
Well, I love that, his philosophy is, they talk about first principles philosophy. and the only laws you can't break are the laws of physics.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
so we constrain ourselves so often to perceived constraints which aren't really there. And I think that Elon and others are looking past those constraints and make it super valuable.
Yeah, 100%. Now, as far as books, I don't know if that's a passion of yours. It is for mine. What book has impacted you most?
Yeah, I used to read a lot, but I only read when I go to bed. And so I try not to read business books because, like, if I read, what was it, Daniel Goleman's Emotional Intelligence while I'm laying in bed, I'm like, oh, am I doing that or am I not doing that? Am I emotionally intelligent or not? And so I can't sleep. But the one book I would say that had the biggest effect on my life was probably Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because I read that when my son was born 17 years ago. And, I was like, I'm going to get a 15-year mortgage. I'm going to pay it down fast and I'm going to have no debt. And, his point was like, you need to go buy assets, and debt is good because they help you buy assets, and assets appreciate and debts reduce. And so, I guess in retrospect, had I just held my Amazon stock, that would have been the most savvy financial decision. But since I, listened to everyone and diversified, I diversified into buying real estate and other things which produce cash flow. And that allowed me to retire early.
Mm. Yeah, nobody could have obviously predicted where Amazon stock was going over the last 20 years. I have to say, we have the same book. The first book that was given to me was How to Win Friends and Influence People. And then from there is Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and just went down that rabbit hole, got the board game. I have to say, I totally agree with you. Put a different track on my life. So very cool. Well, how'd you get into this? I mean, what was your childhood look like? What age did you get interested in technology? I know you grew up and eventually went into physics, but what role did technology play as a child?
Yeah. Well, so my dad was a faculty member at Wayne State when I was growing up, Wayne State University in Detroit, and then eventually the dean at Missouri, and then provost at Arizona State and Iowa State, and then eventually president at University of Nevada. And so when I was a kid, all of our friends were either doctors, lawyers, or professors, all my parents' friends. And I would go to Dad's work and he'd come in and people would say, present something to him and he'd make a decision. And I said, I want to be a professor. And what I learned was that what he did wasn't being a professor. It was being the chairman or the dean, and that he was an administrator and a people leader. And so I followed in his footsteps through college and grad school. And about 3 years into graduate school, I called him and said, I'm not very good at physics. And he said, I wasn't very good at chemistry either, but I'm a good people leader. And I was like, shit, you should have told me that 3 years ago. And I would have done something different. But, I muscled through the program, and, I ended up, my wife was actually a very good biochemist, and we both finished our PhDs at the same time. And we decided I wasn't going to go into physics and she was going to go into biochemistry. And so we decided Boston, San Francisco, or Seattle. And she got a postdoc at Seattle, and I moved out here with her, and we lived in my friend's basement because she was making $30,000 and I was unemployed.
Yeah.
And fortunately, one of my friends from the physics program had gone to be a CS rep at Amazon, and she was able to get my resume routed to the right place. And I was a junior IT PM when I started at Amazon.
And was that the first? So did you go straight from your PhD to Amazon, or did you have any background leading software or logistics businesses before joining Amazon?
I didn't know anything about any of that. Mm. I had been the assistant system administrator to pay for grad school. And so I had learned how to, type ls-al.
Yeah.
And, a few other commands to run the backup tapes. And I came in and said, I don't have any technical skills nor any experience, but I'm young and strong and I'll work hard. And back then that was enough with Sarah's backing. There was a lot of, we liked Sarah. And so she trusts you. So we trust you. And my first role, I got there and it was November 98. So everybody was busy. Mm-hmm. And they were like, go find something to do. And so I went down to the warehouse and I was packing books because we did that back then. And
As
eventually,
a PM.
yes, as a project
Wow.
manager, and I volunteered to go down there sort of 1st of December, and a few days later, the email came out from Joy Covey, who was the chief financial officer at the time, that said, "What are you doing right now? If it's not more important than delighting our customers, stop what you're doing and go down to the warehouse and help pack books." And I was at home at the time, and I was watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It was 8:54 on a Tuesday night. And so I watched the last 6 minutes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I drove to the warehouse. And for the next 2 weeks, my job from midnight to 8 a.m. was to divert packages down our automated packing lines. And the small packages went to the left. The medium packages went to Slam Line 2, and the big ones went to Slam Line 3. And that's when I became passionate about automated sortation. And I was tapped like at 4 a.m. down at the warehouse. And they said, "We're going to open up a bunch more warehouses. We need you to go home. Since you finished your shift at the warehouse, we need you to go back to the office and start ordering equipment and making sure, putting together a schedule to stand up the first warehouse, which was in Fernley, Nevada."
Wow. Incredible. I maybe jumping ahead a little bit, but one of the principles that I've been following about you is solve problems for your manager. And this was for this, CFO, responding to the CFO, but talk to me a little bit about how that philosophy has come about. I see you get a diverse set of reactions when you talk about that. But yeah, would love to hear your philosophy on that and how you applied that to the promotion ranks as you moved up the chain.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I had problems with was that I always thought I was right, and it was more important for me to be right than anything else. And so I would fight with my manager when I thought they were wrong, and I would lollygag and not do whatever it was. And in fact, I had interaction where Jeff Wilkie had a report that he wanted me to write, and I just couldn't get my head around writing it. And when my successor took over running pricing, I said, the first thing I want you to do, my advice is the first thing to do is build this report, because Jeff doesn't like it every quarter when I meet with him, and I haven't built the report yet. Anyway, so I decided, and I realized at some point that my life would be easier if I just solved my boss's problems first and then went about my business. And so when I joined FLEXE, my first, Carl Siebrecht is the founder and CEO, and he's great. He's a fantastic leader. My first one-on-one, he said, "I don't want to be in the details of your business." And I said, "Look, I don't want you in the details of my business. So we're agreed on that. But tell me what the two most important things for you are." And he did. And one of them was to write a sort of a 3-year vision document on what the platform would be. And I said, "Carl, this is going to probably take me 6 months because I don't know anything about what we're doing today." And so on. And he's like, "Sure." And then the next week he said, "How's that report going? How's that paper going?" And so I realized I just come in at 6 a.m. and knock out this paper. And it took 2 hours, wrote it. He loved it. We never really actioned it, but I wrote it and I was able to go back to what I was doing. And so, A, your life is easier if you solve your boss's problems, because you can go back to doing what you want to do. B, bosses value people who solve their problems, who turn their S-team goals from red to green.
Totally.
And if you want your brand to be, "Oh, Dave's lights out," as one of my friends said, I don't have to worry about that. I just tell him what to do and he does stuff. A, that everybody wants you to work for them if that happens. And B, what you find is your boss doesn't have that many things that are important to them. If you knock those out, you can go back to doing your job.
Yeah, that makes it so much easier and yet so much pushback on this topic often. So maybe talk a little bit about as you continue to grow, what principles you brought to the table. There's obviously a very minuscule percentage of people that achieve the level of success that you did at Amazon. was there any underlying principles in the backdrop of this, obviously becoming a CTO, as an engineering manager, even let's call it a SDE one at Amazon, who has this vision of eventually becoming a CTO of a tech company? But looking back on it, what are some maybe principles or lessons that you've learned that you would like to share?
Yeah, my favorite framework that I share with folks, and this was shared with me by Kim Rackmiller, who was a boss I worked for, who's amazing, and I think she's semi-retired now. Anyway, when I was a first-line manager, she said, "Dave, the way you think about it is product, process, people. So if you're a junior engineer, level 4, or whatever level you have at your company, the only value you're providing is the product, right? When you're sleeping and you're not typing on the keyboard, you're not adding value to the company. As you get to be a senior engineer or first line manager, senior manager, you are building processes, right? You're putting the house in order, you're building roadmaps, you are doing ticket reviews, you are setting up on-calls, you're setting up an environment where the engineers can succeed and produce a lot of product. And then as you get to be director and VP, you are spending your time hiring the right people, assessing the people on your team, coaching them, giving feedback, and then if necessary, managing their performance and managing them out. And so it's kind of a spectrum, because even as a VP, you're producing product. Like I had to produce this vision document for Carl, but what I found is that the most leveraged thing that I can do is bring in great engineering talent and bringing great leadership. And it turns out that makes my life easier as well, because if I have a great VP of product, I can just hand that vision document off to them and they can write it and I can review it. And it's much easier to review than to write.
And they can solve problems for you. Yep, 100%.
That's right.
One of the things, being in the recruiting industry for the last 15 years and doing a lot of CTO, VP of engineering searches, I've often heard the initial skill set of one of the first engineers that we brought in was great. They were able to architect the system. They were able to hire and lead a couple engineers, but that's not the person that's going to lead 50, who's not the person that's going to lead 500. How have you been able to morph? I mean, obviously you didn't join Amazon when there's 4 people, but how are you personally able to morph through all of that transition and essentially scale with your career when so many people struggle with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was a copycat, I think. I had great role models in Kim Rackmiller, Suresh Kumar, who's now the CTO at Walmart, Rick Beatty. These are bosses that I have. Dave Clark was a boss. And so I got to interact with all these amazing leaders, as well as my peers who, a bunch of us who knew each other when we were managers, then senior managers and directors and VPs. And we were, not necessarily competitive, because there wasn't like a quota for only so many people could get promoted, but we were personally competitive with each other.
Yeah.
And so I had a ton of role models to pick and choose, and like the process, product, people framework came from Kim, and the way Suresh ran his calibrations, or OLRs, we called them at Amazon, I just copied those. And I wish I had some original thoughts. Most of my thoughts are, either complete plagiarism of Suresh and Kim's, or they're sort of things that I came to the conclusion of when listening to, after listening to all the leaders, and all the way up to Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
I got to interact with a little bit. I once heard a podcast and someone was talking about Bob Dylan, and they said, I consider Bob Dylan the man with the pen, and that there's music flying by us every day. It's in the air, and someone has to reach up and grab the music and put it in their pen and put it on paper. And Bob Dylan is the man with the pen. And so I kind of feel like that. Not that I've ever achieved any greatness as Bob Dylan, but that there's all of these great managers and leaders around me, and there's management books and leadership training and all those things. And so if you let all of those wash over you or fly by you, and then you grab the best of each one, that's been my idea, or my philosophy.
Be a sponge.
Be a sponge.
Yep, 100%.
A selective sponge.
Yes, there we go. There you go. Awesome. And then before we jump into some of the technical conversation topics, I'm curious to hear a little bit about your transition to a CTO. I'm sure your organization was significantly larger at Amazon. How has your role changed to be a C-suite employee? And then what is maybe a misconception that people have with this, what a CTO's role is?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, CTO is just a title. I managed 3,000 people at Amazon in fulfillment and logistics, and now when I joined Flex, it was 22 people, and people said, "Oh, it must be completely different," and it's not. At this level, it's how do I hire the right people, promote the right people, give feedback, manage performance, put the people in the right positions, and then so that's what I spend a ton of time doing today. The first 2 weeks, I ended up flying out to a warehouse where we deploy some software, and it didn't work very well with our biggest customer. And our biggest customer wanted to fire us. And they said, if you don't fix this by this weekend, we're going to fire you. And so I flew out there with a bunch of engineers, and we were working, dawn to dusk. We were deploying new software. We were organizing in a way so that we had, punch lists, and we knew what we were doing, and we had to call the customer and give them updates. And so that's not people, right? That's product. That's like getting in there close to the metal, which is the same thing I did in 1999, standing up the first warehouse at Amazon and shaking out the WMS, which was my first job. And so it has been great to be able to get back to that.
Yeah.
Right. And we ended up
full circle.
And we ended up flying people out to a warehouse the first year because not enough labor showed up, which is exactly what we did at Amazon in 99 and 98. And so those are all great things to do, but there's an anecdote where a guy's in a hole. You've probably heard this, and a doctor walks by and says, here's a prescription, and throws it in the hole. And then the lawyer walks by, and he writes them a lawsuit to sue the person who pushed him in the hole, and so on. And then the friend walks by, and they jump in the hole. And the person says, well, now we're both in the hole. No, I've been here before, though, and I know the way out. So follow me. And so I feel like I jumped in the hole when I joined Flex, and we were able to, save that deal, which was amazing. And, we were worried. One of the best things that came out of it was that all of the engineers who flew out there with me, people were saying, you're going to kill the engineers. They're going to quit. They're not used to this. And every single one of them came back and said, this is the best experience I've had in my life.
Wow.
I got to meet my customer. We worked hard. We achieved things. And, whether you're at Amazon or you're at Flex or you're someplace else, if you don't get to achieve things, which is what you see when companies turn to day two, and we work with, we see companies all the time. If you don't get to achieve things, that's no good.
Yeah, impact, right? I think that everybody's striving for impact. Wanted to talk a little bit about thought processes as you scale an organization through multiple funding rounds. And so maybe we can start off with, what indicators did you look at when joining Flex? If I recall, they're Series B or Series C when you joined?
They had just raised the Series B when I joined.
Okay.
And I wish I had a great story of I did my due diligence and like I had a checklist that I checked off, and it turned out, so I had retired from Amazon and I got bored after a few months, and I started going looking for work. And it turns out, people will say, oh, you can write your ticket and so on. But if you want to stay in Seattle, or at least at the time, there just weren't very many options. There were some unicorn startups, there was Microsoft, Redfin, and Zillow, but that was kind of it. And at senior levels, there weren't a lot of senior roles because they're just, from a timing standpoint, they're just not that many. And so Scott Jacobson at Madrona had called me and said, hey, you need to talk to Carl. They have a great TAM, big product market fit, and they need some help with the product. And I met Carl. And between the time I met him and, the time they made me an offer, like I talked to 3 or 4 different people, and they're like, oh, we love Carl. And, it's a great business idea. And, Carl picked up the phone and talked to a mutual acquaintance at Amazon, said, "Hey, is this Dave Glick guy any good?" And she's like, "Oh my God, you have to hire him immediately." And so we moved pretty quickly. And so, I met the leadership team, and my feeling was like, we have a great TAM, we have a great product market fit. I can't help with those, but execution I can help with. And so like, I'll dive in and we'll see. I didn't know how many people there were. Like, I didn't know how many engineers they were. I didn't know anything about it.
I think I heard 10 days, right? Something like 10 days for meeting Carl, something around there.
Yeah, 10 days from meeting Carl to signing my offer letter.
Wow.
And we had like a 5-minute negotiation where he said, I'm offering you this much stock. I said, I want that much stock. And he said, okay. And we were done with the negotiation.
And off to the races. And so since then you were joining when there was about 22 engineers and
12 engineers. 22 people in the product team total.
Okay. Wow. 12. And so from kind of the word on the street, I mean, you're pushing 300, 400, 500 employees here coming up in the next year or so, right?
Yeah, we're getting to 300 this year, and then we'll be, more next year, depending on what the future holds.
Yeah.
But we expect to continue to grow.
Yeah. And so as the CTO, I'm assuming owning large budgets, working with the CEO, fundraising, what areas in each stage are you specifically focused in? Is there a blueprint? So as a seed funded company, obviously product market fit, as Series A, creating a revenue growth, moving forward without obviously giving away the secrets of the business. I mean, any key indicators or focuses at post C that you're looking at to go D and beyond?
Yeah, well, I came in and my philosophy, whether it's big company, small company, if you come to a new job, the first thing is put the house in order, right? And people, like, almost everywhere that I've joined it's not been like, the customers have not been happy. And this isn't at FLEXE necessarily, but it's in like Amazon fulfillment technology and transportation and ticket. Every job I've come into, the customers have been unhappy with us. And so first 6 months is like, let's tighten the bolts. Let's get the house in order. Let's bail the water, whatever metaphor you want to use. Make sure the customers are happy and get to stability. And that is all focused around operational excellence, right? We need to deliver on time. When we deliver, it needs to work. And you come into a new environment and people don't know who you are and you don't know who they are. But one thing everybody agrees on is we should be operationally excellent. And so I always start with that. And while I'm doing that, that buys the time for hiring, like who are the right people I can bring in, and evaluating the talent and making sure we have the right people on the bus and the right people off the bus. So I always give myself a 6-month time frame, A, to put out the fires, and B, to get my direct report team in order. And so that's what I did when I joined Amazon. That's what I did when I joined FLEXE. I was lucky. The day after I signed my letter, we hadn't announced anything. And a friend called me from Amazon. Her name is Na Lee. And she's like, Dave, I'm ready to leave. I'm like, well, I can introduce you to other people there. And she's like, no, I want to come work for you. And I said, well, I don't have anything. And she's like, really?
Wow. And, wow.
So I'm like, actually, I do. And she came in, several weeks after I started and basically put the house in order, and which allowed me to fly all over the country, shaking out WMSs, spend my time recruiting, spend my time doing podcasts, spend my time raising money. And she was a lifesaver.
And she was a director of engineering, VP of engineering, somewhere in there?
Yeah, we brought her in as director of engineering.
Okay. All right, cool.
And then over the next 6 months, I hired 2 more directors of engineering. And then after, I think, about a year and a half, we as a company decided, I proposed it, but Carl and Adam, our sales leader, we agreed that I could add more value spending more time recruiting, like executive recruiting, and spending more time doing sales, because I know people at Kraft Heinz and Kroger and Lowe's and Walmart and so on, and we happen to have, we opened up we interviewed both of our directors, or all 3 of our directors, to be VP of engineering, and we rolled that all up. And it turned out that Anthony Girolamo took that role. And so he's now running the engineering team, under my guidance, but, he doesn't really need my guidance. But but now I spend a lot of time being very externally facing.
Okay.
And if you think about what startups need, they need customers and they need engineers and they need leaders. And so, I decided that I was uniquely in a position to help us find customers, engineers, and leaders. And, you can't outsource that to the recruiting team.
Yeah. 100%. There are consistent themes coming through, and it's about people and leadership skills. One of the answers sometimes I get from CTOs is come in and make sure the software is performant, or make sure the architecture is right. And you almost come from a totally different perspective, business facing, customer first, and work way back, which obviously probably Amazon drilled into you. But I love the approach.
Yeah, one of the things when I got here, there was many of the engineers were saying, we just chase revenue. We have all this technical debt. We want to work on our technical debt. And we didn't change anything except for say, it's our job to chase revenue. Like as a startup, we will not be in business if we don't land big customers and service them. And so, yes, like we do want to have operationally excellent software. We do want to have great architecture. But we need customers, and by getting more customers will allow us to hire more engineers, which will allow us to move in from survival mode, which is where we were at 2 years ago, to building mode. And I just talked to an engineer at Amazon last week, and he said, "How do you know when you move from survival mode to building mode?" And I said, "I think we did last month." And here are the data points that I have to back that up. And the first was we had a summit where we had all the people, the TPMs, the product managers, the solutions folks, all the people who need to understand our software came in and had to use our software. And all these corporate folks came back and said, this thing sucks. It's unusable. And Anthony said, well, this is not acceptable. We are going to stop what we're doing, and we put 50 tickets in, and we went and fixed all those 50 tickets in like 2 weeks. And then we did this 3 times. The third time, the group came in and said, man, this software is great.
Awesome.
And to me, that was an indicator that we stopped. We weren't like, oh, we are only trying to chase revenue. We can only do what our customers tell us to do. But we now have enough. We have 63 engineers in seat. So we have enough that we can allocate to doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And the second data point was we had a sales summit, and the first line from Carl's mouth and from Adam's mouth was, not all revenue is good revenue.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Which is a departure from most startups.
Yes.
And we joke that Adam is the guy who says no to revenue, and I'm the guy who wants to say yes to all the revenue, which is weird for the CTO versus the CRO. So we kind of got and he's a quiet guy. He's an introvert.
Really?
And he doesn't like to go out and see customers, and I do. So we are supporting each other's strengths and weaknesses.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Those indicators are incredible. You obviously, recruiting and building a team, the culture is at the core focus of everything you do. How have you been feeling, and how have you been able to build a remote culture? You've obviously, I don't remember exactly when you started, but most of your tenure there has been remote. I know traditionally FLEXE was in the office. How have you been able to do this?
Yeah, a couple things. One is we have an amazing HR team led by Deirdre Runnett, who used to be at Zulily. But one of the things we came into this year we came into 2020, we had 3 top-level goals: growth, scalability, and inclusion. And maybe we came into 2021 with this. And I said, I don't agree. We should have 3 top-level goals: growth, growth, and growth, because we still need to grow, and we can't. We are still in survival mode. And Deirdre and Carl and others said, nope, Dave. We want to, and we need to build an inclusive culture from now, and we can't wait until we're $1 billion company to do so. And I've come around. I find myself talking very frequently to people who want to ask me about the culture and is it an inclusive culture. And so we have put it front and center, and it's a commitment that we have great performers who get counseled and managed because their UX, their user interface, is rough, and including me. I've gotten a lot of feedback, and we take it pretty seriously that we want to build an inclusive culture. And doing that remotely, I think, as long as everyone is remote, the playing field is fair and level. And as long as we're all just a face on the 49 faces in the Zoom box, I think it's good. And I don't think it's that much harder. We have several people who have gone out of their way to build activities and Slack channels and all of these things. Just to be candid, I haven't been deeply involved except for approving the funding as needed for those things. But it's interesting, like as a proverbial old white guy, I'm good. But as we have, call them Gen Z or millennials or folks who've grown up in a much more inclusive environment, it's important. And I always check myself because we're having discussions about these, and sometimes we'll end up with all the old white guys saying one thing and then others saying another thing, and I take that as a signal where I need to step back, and even if it doesn't hit me viscerally, it's important. And so that's a big learning that I've had. I do think it will be a challenge as people start going back into the office, where you have 2 people on a team in the office and 3 remote, or 4 in the office and 1 remote, that it will not be a level playing field. Yeah. And so we are spending a lot of time thinking about what guardrails and what policies and best practices can we put in place so that people feel included when they're remote.
100%. It's a tough problem to solve. We're having many conversations around this as well, likely to go back to a hybrid model. But when your top performers are continuing to maybe move out of the location, it's all about the people. And so finding that balance and inclusion is. I'll have to call you up in 6 months and see if I can pick your brain. Yeah. As it relates to recruiting. I gave this talk a couple of years ago called David versus Goliath, and it was centered around what do you see the future of talent acquisition looking like when there's Amazon, Google, all of these, big companies with ballooning stock prices compared to your current situation. I know selling a vision is obviously important, but have you learned anything? Have you been surprised at anything? I mean, what's been your experience having huge amount of funds at Amazon being able to go after principal engineers and recruiting for a startup like FLEXE?
Yeah, it has been hard. There's people say, well, Amazon has a salary cap of $160,000 or $175,000.
Well, the RSUs.
Yeah. The RSUs, right?
Yeah.
So it's liquid comp. Yeah. It's not cash comp, it's liquid comp. And especially with the inflated stock price there, and Microsoft's stock price is quite nice over the last several years as well. And so if you figure that 80% of the engineers in Seattle work at Microsoft or Amazon just because of the size, we had discussions, especially before we raised Series C, that we can't compete with Microsoft and Amazon for engineers. And my response was, we can't afford not to compete with Microsoft and Amazon for engineers. And so we can't compete on liquid comp. But
base salary you
take salary plus equity, and we cannot compete on salary plus equity today. But you need to paint the picture of what the equity would be worth at the next raise and the next raise. And again, I spent a bunch of time with exec folks, not with engineers recruiting. So I am dealing with senior managers, directors, VPs. And that equity package is highly equity weighted.
Yes.
Right. As you know, dealing with startups, nobody's making more than $200,000 to $250,000 in cash ish.
Correct. Yeah.
Even at the executive levels. And so then, what I found is you can't poach people who don't want to be poached. Mm-hmm. And so, but there are lots of people in Seattle who are unhappy with their employer. and unhappy with the culture at their employer. Not just at Amazon, Microsoft, like all over Seattle and all over the country.
100%.
And so one thing we had to do is get our compensation to be competitive, and to say, we are going to pay in a way that we can compete, not with Google and Facebook, because nobody can compete with Google and Facebook, but you should be able to compete with Amazon and Microsoft on a fully landed total comp basis. And so that was a big, call it discussion.
Yep.
And, we had to go to the board and say, like, we can't afford not to compete. And they wholeheartedly supported us. And our new CFO did the modeling, and it's going to be expensive. It's going to be millions of dollars. But we made a decision as a company that we have to be competitive. But then, there will always be, like, being competitive doesn't mean we're the highest offer. There will always be someone who pays better. And so that's where our culture comes in. And what people like about a startup is, as opposed to a megacorp, is that you're much closer to the metal and you can make decisions quickly. The downside of many startups is they can't afford to hire a senior leader. And so they're learning the HR processes, and they are learning operational excellence. And, many of them, their most senior talent, their CTO could be a level 6 from Amazon,
100%,
or a level, whatever,
yes,
52 from Microsoft. I don't know what the leveling scheme is over there, but someone, more junior than I. And so the combination of, hey, you're coming to a small environment where you can get stuff done and there's not a lot of bureaucracy, and we have senior leadership, some of whom come from Amazon, some of whom come from Microsoft, some who came out of retirement because I've known them for 20 years. And so you build this core leadership team that is a competitive advantage in recruiting. And when people come and meet, Julia Donald and Troy Roberts and so on, they're like, these are people I want to work with. And so, getting the comp so it's not, a slap in the face, and people can still take care of their families. And then building the inclusive environment and being surrounded by highly talented people. I think that's the mix.
Yep, 100%. 100%. I totally understand. The people is critical. Being able to sell the leadership skill set and track record is massive. And I think that's why I've heard such positive things about what you've been able to do there. Last technical question. Machine learning, AI, it's being talked about all over the place. Every company is doing it, although we could say some are just some basic statistical modeling. What's your view of the future as it relates to that? Do you foresee that being a big play within FLEXE? And do you have any philosophical approaches to implementing machine learning and AI into the technology space?
Yeah, that's a great question. My favorite joke is, it's AI when you talk to investors, ML when you talk to engineers, and you do it on spreadsheets when you're actually doing it.
Exactly. Excel functions.
Linear regression when you actually do it. And I posted that on LinkedIn, and I got a ton of views and comments and likes. And so I think there's some people get it. That said, like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Gates all say that AI is the future. And they're right a lot, all three of them. But for things like the Amazon Go store, you couldn't do it without AI. For things like Tesla's self-driving car, you couldn't do it without AI. There are things that are going to be opened up by AI. There are problems that can be solved better by AI, like fraud, where you're trying to do a multivariate regression. And so that is important. For putting things in boxes and putting them on a truck, it's not clear that AI is going to be core to our strategy. I do want to find some AI, because all of our competitors are advertising their AI powered platform. And I'm telling our marketing team, well, we should say AI powered in all your things. And they're like, it's a fine line between exaggerating and fraud.
Yes, 100%, 100%. No, I've been prior to this conversation, I was thinking about opportunities, and if it's not where the customer needs it to be at this second, being customer obsessed has obviously worked for you, and so maybe that comes up as more and more customers come on board or scale comes on board. But It needs to be right for the business. And so often we see people trying to implement it or spending a ton of money on different tools when there's the data's not even there to leverage it effectively.
Yeah, for sure. And Amazon uses AI for do inventory placement, but when they were a $20 billion company, which still puts them in the Fortune 100, that was all being done by spreadsheets.
Yeah.
And allocation factors and things like that, which are pretty static. So anyone who's not running at Amazon scale or Walmart scale, I think it's not clear that they need AI for their fulfillment and logistics.
Yeah, 100%. Awesome. Well, I guess my final question for you, I mean, you obviously came out of retirement. What gets you out of bed at day? Like, why did you come do this? What fuels you?
Yeah, I mean, I was presenting at our sales summit last week, and I say there are three things that are important to me professionally. One is people at our company. I mean, even more broadly than that, the people in my tribe, and many of those are at our company, and some of them are outside the company. And I brought these people. They followed me to Flex. They came because I was here, and so making them proud, growing the business, taking care of those folks is number one for me. The second is I set myself a goal to become a LinkedIn influencer, which means I need 100,000 followers. And so that might be another 2-year project, but working on that. And the third is, I want to make us all a bunch of money.
And, of course.
And, my comp is equity based. But many of the other folks at Flex are equity based as well. Mm-hmm. And I brought many of these people in, but all these people are part of my call it tribe, for lack of a better word. Part of my friend group, and I want to make them all successful. And some of them will be able to buy a house with their stock, and some of them will be able to buy an island with their stock. Mm-hmm. And we want to make this amazingly succceusl.
Well, I think you're on track. I mean, the most recent funding round was incredible, and really excited for you guys. So, for all who's listening, I think go check out Flex career page. David, is that the best place to see where there's opportunities to join your team, or any other plugs that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I definitely. There's a link on our site to the career page. For senior folks, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I try to respond to most everybody who writes to me, and a day doesn't go by that someone doesn't write and say, "Hey, I'm looking for career advice."
Yes. Yeah.
and so if they're credible, I usually spend half an hour and chat, and that's part of my And it's not like I want you to come to Flex. It's how can I help you find what you want? And I advise a bunch of companies in Seattle, and they are always looking for people. And, I found that helping people find the right thing for them, not the right thing for me, but the right thing for them, pays off sort of both in karmic energy, but as well as if they go work at Target, maybe we do business with them. Or if they go work at Chewy, maybe we go do business with them. And so building, sort of thinking expansively about the network and the tribe has been what I've put my focus into, right, wrong, or indifferent, over the last couple of years.